Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be covering another user-submitted story. This time, the original story is called Witchdoctor's Baby. You can kind of glean what that's about before I get into it, but it's a pretty twisted tale. Before we get into that, I have a couple things to run through. The main thing that I want to run through actually is, you remember when we had the donations there a while ago and it was successful. We bought our new audio interface and that's fantastic. Well, we had a late donator, can't use his name. He wants to go simply by an eccentric listener. And I also can't announce his the amount that he donated, except to say that it was the second highest that we've received. And so I still wanted to honor what we had promised with the custom podcast and all of that stuff. And in this person's case, one of the things that he's very interested in, I spoke to him in email, he's very interested in this on a personal level. And what he wants, and I'm asking you guys if you have any information on it to send it to me, is if you have any experiences with reptilians. If you know anything on the reptilians personally, or have had any personal experiences with them, or knowledge that isn't common out there. Anything that you can give me. And it's our understanding that this is it's going to be a longer... we're going to let this go for a bit to see what if anything, that we can get. It's a topic that's, like I said, is very important and personal to this donator, so we're going to give it a go and see what we can get from everybody. And also on that note, Ryan and I had been talking about this before we even got this donation, and we're going to put the donation button back on the website, but it's not, don't take that the wrong way. It's not for, okay, well, donate to us now or anything. It's just starting with this donation, we're going to keep that in the bank, and basically as we need things, or, things that we want to do to improve the show as we go along, we're going to use those funds exclusively for it. Some things that Ryan and I have talked about was getting t-shirts made. We've talked about advertising the channel through YouTube. We've talked about doing it's at some point getting video cameras and doing live video episodes. So while we're not absolute right now what we want to do, we're keeping it in the bank, and as we get donations, and there's certain things that we think will help the show or bring in more stories or whatever, more content and improve the show for you guys, that's what we're going to use it for. So I'm going to put that button back on the website. It'll be up on should be the right next to where you log in or log out on the official website. And if you feel like donating, go ahead. That's fantastic. We're not going to stop the show or anything like that. It's not like before. It's not a desperate situation. We're just going to leave it there, and whatever happens, happens. Another thing that we're looking into is selling custom podcasts. We haven't nailed a price right yet, but keep a lookout for that button on the website as well, if that's anything that anybody's interested in. And with that said, the last thing I want to say is if you have an effed up story of your own on the paranormal or UFOs or whatever, you can send that to us so that we can get it on the website and get it into a podcast, which you can do at the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And that's what all this is about, is getting your stories and getting it out there. And of course, we enjoy reading it. So with that having been said, we're going to jump into the topic of tonight, which was sent in by Spike Hunter, and he sent this in on August 30th, 2015. And the original story's title on the website is Witchdoctor's Baby, if you decide to read it there. And with that said, let's jump in. So, he was 14 or 15 when this took place. He said his family has a history with the paranormal, so it didn't surprise his mother or his grandparents to see any of this stuff going on, since it kind of tends to happen to his family a lot. And some people refer to their family as insane, but as he put it, shit happens. So on this particular day, he was out on a walk and of course I'm going to mess this name up, something fierce. Ryan, if you're following this, you can jump in with how you think it is, but it looks like Van Rensdor in South Africa.
I think that's pretty close.
Okay, so that's pretty good for me. And that's where his grandparents lived at the time. And anyway, he was out visiting his grandparents. There was, nothing better to do. And he describes it as a farming and old folks town. And on this walk, he took the usual route that he normally does, and he said it is a dirt road that takes you around the town, and it's about 5 kilometers long. And at the start, he found some hoof prints that he believed belonged to a large animal. He kind of thought it looked like cattle prints, but the largest animal that was in the area were sheep. So he was kind of baffled by this, but he shrugged it off as just someone getting a cow, and he continued on his walk. And for some reason, he started to track the animal down the road, and the tracks were fresh and were very clearly visible. And they suddenly just left the road, and he followed them, and they led up to this very tall fence with a large, it had these two, and I'm going to mess this word up too, but these two large kiat trees. Ryan, are you following? I need my backup net here. Right?
I missed where I was following along, but I just
Kihaat. Kiat trees, or
yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, Ryan's agreeing before anybody, comes and criticizes my butchering of this. Anyway, so these two large, strange trees, okay, that's native to the area. And anyway, so these trails led up to this fence, these two trees, and then they just disappeared. And he was confused, and he began to look around to see if he could find these tracks again, and he couldn't. So he went and continued on with his walk, but he kept hearing this scratching sound. And he kept turning around to see what it was, but of course couldn't see anything. So he was getting a little bit freaked out by this, because around the side of the road were these very large rocks. And instinctively, he put his hand on his hunting knife that he still carries with him to this day. And if it was a Rui cat, and again, it's all foreign words to me.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out the pronunciation of that one too. A Roy cat or Ruai cat?
Well, it's a ROOI. You guys can correct me in the comments. So I'm assuming it's a predator. So he looked to see if it was this, and anyway, it wouldn't help him a whole lot with this knife, as he put it. So I guess this is a fierce animal to be reckoned with. The knife would more so probably be a placebo effect. But he said if it was just some drunk person with the intent on mugging him, well, that guy would be sorry. So 10 minutes later, he gets this feeling that something was wrong. And being a kid and not knowing better, he drew the knife and he climbed the rocks to see what was following him. And he said to his horror, he saw something that looked like a goat man or a miniature. Now, when I think miniature, I think of these little things my brother plays with, but I
think he meant Minotaur.
Probably. Yeah, that makes more sense. But I'll tell you, a goat man is a scary sight. So, in any case, that's what he saw. And he said he nodding it off as a dead bull and a trick of the mind, he continued on with his walk. So, he didn't want to really analyze this. And he said the scratching sound continued to follow him.
Which is definitely something like, people might say, well, that's insane. You've seen a goat man. Yeah, but your mind does funny things when you see something that is completely outside of your experience and frame of reference. Sometimes, your brain just kind of short circuits and you just kind of move on, saying to yourself, that can't possibly have been what I thought it was.
I've actually seen things like, well, not exactly like that, but I've seen things I couldn't explain and just shrugged it off. Believe it or not, I don't investigate everything because I, like a lot of people, when I see things, just assume that it's it's a glitch in my brain. So in any case, he continues on. He continues to hear the scratching sound, and at the halfway point around this 5-kilometer trail, he met up with one of the people that he knew. And it was an older bushman, and of course he's not putting in his real name, but he was a shaman of the tribe that was there. And he told him what he had experienced over a cup of tea. And then the shaman told him of a legend of his people that, they have in this area. And basically what it is, about 100 years before, he told him that there was a sangoma, which is, I guess, a different way to say witch doctor. And it made a tokelshi. I'm telling you, there's a lot of strange words here. But Tokeloshe. So I'm saying tokelshi. You guys can correct me. And anyway, the witch doctor made a tokelshi to terrify a Dutch farmer in the area. And when a tokelshi is done with its task, it is killed by the sangoma, shaman. And or it will go on causing mischief until the end of time. And he went to confront the sangoma, and he killed it. And the tokelshi was not killed and continued throughout the years. Okay, I just messed up a part of it. The guy that went to confront, or the shaman went to confront the tokelshi, and the tokelshi killed him. And then the tokelshi continued throughout the years, I guess, going on for eternity, causing mischief, just like the legend, right? So anyway, he asked the shaman if he could take him to the tracks, and that's what they did. And he said it still haunts him to this day. What happened? He said when they got to the rocks, the shaman took out his bow, and he told him that if he felt a malicious presence around, and he instructed Spike to stay put. And anyway, being a kid, he climbed over the rocks and he screamed, and he followed the shaman around, this clamping onto his arm he followed the shaman, and he saw whatever this thing was clamping onto the shaman's arm. And anyway, he said that he used his knife and he sank it into its arm about 3 or 4 times around the bicep. And he suddenly heard a sickening crackling, and the shaman screamed. And the thing crushed his arm, and then it released its grip. And in the same motion, it swung its arm, catching Spike square in the chest and knocking him down. And he said it just looked at him, and he could feel it, like it felt like it spoke to him. And it felt like, and he said, do excuse his terminology, but like a psychic mind probe saying, so I think telepathy would be the appropriate way to say this.
Yeah.
And what he gleaned from this was, it is not your time, young hunter. I will find you at a later date when my master commands it. And then he left. And he took his shaman to the house, and and then to the hospital, and he never ever returned to that road again. And when his grandfather passed, he left him a book that has been passed down through generations, and it entails all the unnatural, and Spike interpreted this as paranormal stuff that has happened to his family, in the ways to, I guess, beat and or expel the entities, along with a few hundred rituals for magic. And he's performed at least 3 of them, all of them being conjuring rituals. So to sum up the story, because I know I've paused a lot trying to figure out some of these words, but in short, Spike, he was visiting his grandparents' place, which was out in an old farming community, lots of dirt roads and stuff. He took a 5-kilometer walk around the place, and midway started to notice this scratching sound of something following him. And at some point, his paranoia got the better of him. He climbed up these rocks, looked back, and he saw what he thought to be a goat man. And but he dismissed it as a fragment of his imagination. He continued on, ran into a friend he knew who was a shaman, and the shaman relayed to him the story about these creatures called a tokelshi, or whatever it was, and the idea being that these things are created by a witch doctor to do its bidding, and after it does its bidding, it's you're supposed to kill it. But in some cases, that doesn't happen. In this case, there was a witch doctor who had done this, and when they went to kill the tokelshi actually killed him, and then it continued on, living practically forever. And so that's what he believes he saw. So when he took the shaman back to the dirt road where he had found it, and he was supposed to stay put. He wasn't supposed to get involved, but being a kid, he couldn't help himself, and he ran up to see this thing clamped onto the shaman's arm. And at that point, he whipped out his knife. He stabbed it several times in the arm. And at that point, it let the shaman go, but it spoke to the kid, or Spike, with telepathy to say, it is not your time, young hunter. He'll be back for him in the future. So in other words, this thing will be back at a time unbeknownst to Spike. And at that point, maybe it will try to kill him. So Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I can honestly say I've never heard of this kind of a creature. Like the description of it, sure, but the I've never heard of that name. I'm reading it as Tokiloshi. Yeah, Tokiloshi. Anyway, let's face it. When it comes to strange creatures, Goatman isn't that unusual of one. I mean, they've seen Goatmen in Europe, Goatmen in North America, and now Goatmen in South Africa.
Yep.
I love human hybrid creature stories, and personally, I've heard a couple. I've heard a couple of people, particularly from native peoples that live in the area here where I am, and it's not unusual for them to talk about, like centaur-like creatures. The top half being a man and the bottom half being a horse.
How many women probably love that that concept, right?
But
they don't ride on the top; they ride on the back.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
I'm sorry. Go on.
I think we got what you meant. I've always wondered. There's so many myths worldwide. Sure, the Egyptians have a whole pantheon of gods. Who are all hybrid animal creatures, Sobek is a man and a crocodile, and what is Ra is a half man, half jackal, and that was Osiris is a half man, half bird, an ibis or something like that. So it's a very, very strong theme in all of, human history going way back and all over the planet, just the goat man itself is something that has been reported on 3 separate continents. So we come across stories like this, your first reaction is to dismiss it, But, I think if anything, we can say that there are very strange things on this world of ours. And, I wouldn't put it, the existence of such a creature. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, well, one of the things I find interesting when you get any story that's not, in the Western culture, it's not Canada or the United States or whatever. And maybe it's because I'm here and I'm just used to what's here, but I always find stories that come from other places to be more interesting to me. Like, I've read several cryptids from Japan that are so interesting, and not like the kinds of stuff that we're used to hearing over here. And that's something we're going to have to do a show on at some point too. But yeah, the names, some of the names are different, but there are certain similarities with this. I've read several stories where, there would be cloven hoof tracks that somebody followed. I've read stories like that from Canada, from the United States, from the United Kingdom. So that part is common, but the whole, I guess, story or background with the witch doctor and, the fact that they could do a spell to create these things that it had, although, I just thought of something. How, like, in this case, you have they create this goat man and it has a purpose or whatever, or how did you pronounce it? Tokloshi or Tokloshi? Tokiloshi?
Takiloshi.
Right, the Takiloshi. Okay, so in this case, allegedly, it's made for a purpose and then it dies. But you know what? We just did a story that had a similar concept to that. Remember the one we did with the black magic? And the one where there was this house, these rich servants owned the house, and someone had performed a black magic ritual. And anyway, when they had someone who knew about the stuff go over, she did this ritual or whatever, and she could see the entities that were manifesting these stones and throwing it at the poor servant. And those entities were actually created only for that purpose. That was all they could do, was throw stones. That was their whole purpose. So again, we have entities that I guess are manifested through magic.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because he doesn't specifically say that the shaman created the Tokiloshi. It just, I guess, obviously English isn't his first language, and it's a little difficult to get, exactly what he means out of the words. in some cases, because it isn't stated specifically, but
Well, I guess it depends on how you read it, but the exact line is that the witch doctor made a tokiloshi to terrify a Dutch farmer. So you can either say he made it as he created it, or maybe it was that he was able to perform magic on an entity that already existed to carry out his bidding. The only thing being that once it carried out its task, you were supposed to you were supposed to kill it or whatever, and instead the reverse happened here, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess it really doesn't matter, but for me, when I'm pondering these kinds of things, I think, it'd be a hell of a lot easier to, in my mind anyway, to summon something that was already here than to, create a being. Just on the face of it, it sounds like one would need a lot more, energy or power, or however you want to quantify it, to make something out of nothing. Or
I guess, yeah, and you're probably right there. That's actually what made the remember the story we did with the black-eyed woman was like a teenager.
Yeah.
And she was manifested. That was actually manifested and uses a remote control, the eyes and ears and control all remotely from the person doing the ritual. That was creepy.
It was very creepy.
And that would have had to take some considerable power, I would think.
So when you're talking about a big, physically very strong creature, something that, he could just crush a man's arm with one hand. I wonder, are there dark corners of this world where such things linger?
I wonder if I don't know what this area is like. I mean, I do know that he described it as a farming town, but I don't know like the broad, how broad the area is, kind of, not real industrialized or whatever.
Well, and South Africa.
Yeah, see, like my concept of it, like I can guess based on what I saw, but I'll probably be like, "You idiot! That's not what I was like at all." when I say it.
Well, so, South Africa's huge, and it's very, it has a lot of diverse geography. There's deserts and grasslands and mountains. And
would I be correct in saying that there's likely a lot of open, natural areas there?
Oh, most certainly.
Right. Okay. Because that's what I wanted to say. I just didn't want to get ripped up for it. But like my point being that in Canada and the U.S., of course, we've industrialized the hell out of the areas. I mean, you can find remote spots, but
not so much up here. Like, you got to remember that while like we have a couple of 100,000 square kilometers over the United States in terms of landmass, but we literally have like 10% of its population. So there are a lot of wide open spaces in Canada.
There is, but not a lot of people take advantage of it. Right? Most of us live in a city, or in at least a suburb that's fairly popular, or it's like it's happening, it's a lively place. But a lot of stories that come out of, even here in Canada, the stories that we get come from people in more isolated areas, or it comes from people who were on trips in isolated places, whether they be camping, hiking, whatever. And I'm not saying, there's two things that I think about that. One is it possible that all the noise and pollution, and let's face it, you got Wi-Fi signals, like, it doesn't hurt you or I, we don't think, but there's people that are allegedly allergic to it. They can't be around the stuff. You got radio bands going everywhere. Maybe different entities can't stand to be around that. They can't, they can't exist in a comfortable way around that stuff. So they don't tend to go into industrialized areas, or
just the large groups of human beings.
Or the other possibility being that maybe they are there, but we're so distracted by everything that we can't notice it. It's a lot different when you're in a very isolated area. There's nobody around. You pick up on the slightest sounds that you hear, the slightest feelings. You know, you feel more vulnerable. You're more aware. You're more in tune when you're in the city or you're in anywhere, like I said, that's lively like that. You're just, you know, you're too distracted. I mean, there's stuff going around you all the time. There's cars going by. There's people with dogs. There's birds flying everywhere. Your phone's going off. You're texting. You got to be gone to work. It's busy.
Well, I guess, it's probably both. I live in a big city, and there are a certain number of animals here. Rabbits, deer, coyotes, foxes, skunks, who've all adapted to living in the city. Like there's city deer, there's city rabbits, and they spend almost like a lot of their time on the fringes of the city or in the city. And if such bizarre paranormal creatures exist, I would expect there to be a kind of a similar spread. You get those strange creatures that only come out in the faraway places, the dark corners of our world, the devil valleys, and the strange underground tunnels and these kinds of things. But I think from all the many stories that we've received from people, obviously there are some city versions of some of these things that go bump in the night. Some of these things seem comfortable coming right into your bedroom.
Yeah, a little too comfortable. At least they could bring you a sandwich, right? Because my wife don't do it, but anyway, point being that yes, but is it possible that we're just more, like I said, like I've seen things, I've honestly seen things that I can't explain. I almost feel stupid trying to, because it's so hard to articulate. And I know it was weird, but I can't really explain it, or for that matter, I can't, like you'd think in a situation like that, you would go and investigate, but I totally didn't. I was like, man, that's fucking weird. And, I looked for a little bit and then I just drove away. How many people does that happen to? I wonder. Right? I mean, is part of the problem that we don't hear more of this stuff is that, we dismiss it.
I think you're very right, because I mean, I'm not the biggest social butterfly in the world. I don't have a lot of acquaintances and friends. But I have met so many people who, and because I make a point of actually asking people, because, of the show, and I'm weird and I have these kinds of interests, like about these kinds of weird stuff that happened to them. And, I'll be damned if not a good, 70% of people have come up, told me really strange, short, a story about something they seen, just fleetingly, or they sat there and looked at it and then, just got away because they just couldn't make sense of what they were seeing, and this kind of thing.
But it still sticks with them, though, right?
Oh, exactly. It sticks with them, but they, and I asked them, and I see them think, and then they tell me the story, and I asked them, why'd you have to think so much? This seems like a something that would be at the forefront of your mind. And you say, you know what? It's something I haven't thought about in years, something like that.
That's interesting. I know, a couple of people that I've gotten stories from. Actually, I'll tell you where a lot of stories I've heard, but like nobody wants to like put it out there, right? Because I know a lot of people who work at the hospital, and a lot of nurses and stuff like that. They see a lot of things in those hospitals that I'm not just talking about people dying and stuff like that, but they see a lot of strange stuff like ghosts and just weird. I guess you could categorize it under the paranormal, but A lot of these people don't want to. They don't want to share it in a public way, right? I mean, they'll tell you, and I respect that. I'd never tell a story that anybody didn't want me to tell. But it's such a shame because some of the stories are really cool. And especially for me, at least, it has that local factor, right?
But at least that, like just with the few people that we speak to ourselves personally, the percentage of people who have, these bizarre occurrences, some on the level as Spike's story, there has to be such a high percentage of people with weird stuff that's happened to them.
Well, that's what it has to be. Like, the way I think about it personally, you take you and I, for example. We've had a handful of things happen, right? I mean, when you think of the span of our whole life, it's pretty insignificant. It's like a blip, right? But those experiences stuck with us, and we're just two people. And you look at the whole population. If the whole population each has, a handful of stories, it's not a small phenomenon. It's a big phenomenon that not everybody talks about, right? Because
well, exactly. It's I guess what I'm getting at, that the number of events that actually happen worldwide that are outside of what we call everyday reality must actually be staggering. All the little villages, all the little towns and communities scattered right across the planet. I mean, statistically, somebody's being chased by a goat man right now.
Yep.
Like that, and I mean, I say it as kind of a joke, but at the same time, just with the number of just absolute bizarre tales. Like I said, I've heard about centaurs. I've heard about dog-like creatures with the faces of men. And that's just here in Canada. I had a friend of mine tell me about a story in Oman, which is in the Middle East. He was driving down the highway with a friend, and he looked over his shoulder, like out his driver window, and seen this giant hairy creature sitting on a rock like 50 feet from the highway on this little hill. And he said it was like perfectly camouflaged, but like he's seen it, it's clear, like it wasn't dark or anything. And he just, just stared at it for, 5 or 6 seconds as he was driving. And then, he said there was no way to turn around on the highway at all. But, and that stuck with him for years and years afterwards.
Yep. Well, and it would, right? I mean, even the smallest things, when I think of my own stories that I've experienced, it seems so tame, when I compare it to the stuff that we get sent. It's like, well, our stories kind of suck.
Well, it really makes me wonder about the true nature of this world, because we talk about, the regular, the normal, the everyday, and that's what is everybody's day-to-day experience. But, outside of that, there appears to be such a blatant different reality going on in the world around us.
Yep. And on that note, I think we'll wrap this one up here. But I do want to remind everyone again, we are looking for your stories with reptilians, whether you have experiences with them or if you know anybody that has experience with them. Anything that we wouldn't know normally is not out in the public media. Anyone who knows anything like that, please send it to us. We are collecting this for our donator, and that's what he wants. It's a very personal topic to him. So if you could get that to us, and maybe we will be doing a podcast on it too, of course. But yeah, get that into us. And if you have your own effed up story, we'd like to hear it. You can submit that to us at our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. I'll get it on the website, and I'll also get it on, or we'll get it into a podcast. And with that having been said, stay tuned very shortly because we will be doing a podcast on the mysterious Mandela effect. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much for listening.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Doing a like it's at some point getting video cameras and doing like live video episodes. So while we're not like absolute right now what we want to do, we're keeping it in the bank, and as we get donations and as there's certain things that we think will help the show or bring in more stories or whatever, more content and improve the show for you guys, that's what we're going to use it for. So I'm going to put that button back on the website. It'll be up on should be right next to where you log in or log out on the official website. And if you feel like donating, go ahead. That's fantastic. We're not going to stop the show or anything like that. It's not like before. It's not a desperate situation. We're just going to leave it there, and whatever happens, happens. Another thing that we're looking into is selling custom podcasts. We haven't nailed a price, standing that it's going to be a longer. We're going to let this go for a bit to see what if anything that we can get. It's a topic that's, like I said, is very important and personal to this donator. So we're going to give it a go and see what we can get from everybody. And also on that note, Ryan and I had been talking about this before we even got this donation, and we're going to put the donation button back on the website, but it's not. Don't take that the wrong way. It's not for well, donate to us now or anything. It's just starting with this donation, we're going to keep that in the bank, and basically as we need things or things that we want to do to improve the show as we go along, we're going to use those funds exclusively for it. Some things that Ryan and I have talked about was getting t-shirts made. We've talked about advertising the channel through YouTube. We've talked about donator. Can't use his name. He wants to go simply by an eccentric listener. And also can't announce his the amount that he donated, except to say that it was the second highest that we've received. And so I still wanted to honor what we had promised with the custom podcast and all of that stuff. And in this person's case, one of the things that he's very interested in, I spoke to him in email, he's very interested in this on a personal level. And what he wants, and I'm asking you guys if you have any information on it to send it to me, is if you have any experiences with reptilians. If you know anything on the reptilians personally, or have had any personal experiences with them, or knowledge that isn't common out there, anything that you can give me, and it's our understanding. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be covering another user-submitted story. This time, the original story is called Witchdoctor's Baby. You can kind of glean what that's about before I get into it, but it's a pretty twisted tale. Before we get into that, I have a couple things to run through. The main thing that I want to run through actually is, you remember when we had the donations there a while ago and it was successful. We bought our new audio interface and that's fantastic. Well, we had a late